Why don't we start off with maybe getting you to summarize the reasons behind the 1979 version being rushed into theaters, as it was so described.
Okay. And hi, Mike.
And hi.
Hi. So Robert Wise is a director who always said that he needs to have the script perfect before starting a film. And even at the time when they were doing Star Trek: The Motion Picture, there was a mad rush to get the film finished first with the script. It wasn't locked before they started the film. And Bob said, okay, well, we know we have a deadline because the studio had booked it into many theaters for December 7th, 79. And while they were shooting the film, they kept getting different revisions to the script, and he just worked his way through it as much as he could. And it was this brilliant filmmaker who was able to keep the ball rolling as they went along. At the time, they had hired an effects company that had absolutely brilliant ideas. I mean, the world was living with Star Wars at the moment. They did these beautiful effects by Dykstra and Company. And they went with another company that, of course, because the others were doing other films, but they went another company with brilliant ideas. And the thing is that because Star Wars had raised the bar so high, these new companies came in with their own brilliant ideas. But it seemed that this is based on a conversation with Doug Trumbull and Richard Urich I had years ago. It seemed that those effects concepts, while brilliant, weren't able to really be implemented in the time schedule that they had, and that became a real problem. So what happened was that the effects in a very urgent situation had to switch to someone else to finish the effects, or even to do the effects, essentially. And that work became split between Doug Trumbull and John Dykstra. John, of course, who had come off of Star Trek, and Doug off of 2001. So they went back to the studio and said, hey, we need a little more time, but they had already pre-sold the film, so it had to go into theaters on the date. So what ended up happening was these guys started working around the clock to finish the effects, and Bob had to continue editing the film to get it down to a place where it was releasable. And there was a limitation also because of the theaters and running times that it had to be 130 minutes. So not knowing what the effects were going to be yet, that they were coming in, even how they looked in the end, he cut the film down to a basic structure and dropped as many of the scenes as he could, just to make sure that there'd be room for the visual effects. And then he went to Jerry Goldsmith and asked Jerry to write a symphony, because he wasn't entirely sure what effects would work or not. So the music had to carry some of the scenes as well. So using so many years of talent, just being able to tell so many great stories in his history, Bob created the show for effects to be placed in. So as effects came in, they placed them into the film, and it was literally up to the last day of assembly that effects kept coming in. And even after they finished, had to lock the film to bring it to the premiere in Washington, D.C., effects were continuing to come in at the time. But also, when you have so many different things that are last minute, there was no time to color grade the film. So they spent 4 days doing a basic flat color grade across the film in order to make sure that anything that came in would fit into that heightened position, as well as the sound mix. Whatever you had to only be, it couldn't correlate to certain things on screen. And when they did do it, they only had short time to complete it. So what you had was something that actually was very successful, of a first assembly of a film, of just pieces placed together to tell a narrative. The problem is character moments, even the purpose of the film, or the story of the film, which is in the Spock crying scene, were left out. These were intended to be put back in once they knew what was going to be the full narrative. And what you ended up with was something that looked great, but didn't quite tell the story. And even some of the characters weren't entirely in character, because there was no real time to fine tune. And as Bob always has previous screenings, to see what the film was going to be and know how to fine tune it. For example, a perfect example was Kirk has a line when there's the transporter accident that happens, that he goes, "Oh my God, these people have died." Right. That was a bad laugh. It would have been cut in a second, it had there been one screening.
Right.
But instead, there was 20 years of screenings that had to explain what all the problems were. So that is what happens tonight.
The movie did well regardless. Is it
It did
hard for
amazingly well
you to to know on the back end, all the people that were behind the scenes, knowing that this thing came together at the last minute. Is it hard to watch a picture knowing what it should have been compared to what went out?
Uh, if it wasn't hard, I wouldn't be here.
Fair
Just,
enough.
you had to know that there was something better. And I have to tell you that certainly the technology today has enabled so many subtle fixes that were brought in. There were even puzzles that I was talking to Bob about for, back when we did the project originally, where we didn't quite have solutions to problems. And now with technology, we're able to add so much subtlety, and even in the color, add subtlety that helped unconsciously tell story points that really came through now. I honestly, I didn't know until we had the first screenings how really successful those moments were. And as I like mentioning, there's two moments that have always been, just on screen as they were, presented, this is what you're seeing, that I consider actually now to be kind of dream sequences. What you're seeing now, because there's subtlety to seeing and hearing, that subtlety is giving you the suggestion of what you need to know, but what you're seeing isn't quite what's happening on screen.
Right, right.
It's interesting, but that's great storytelling. It's all about how can we get the point across and make sure people just disappear into the film and love it.
Well, the first thing I noticed from this 4K director's edition was the color. It just pops. Like, it's such a beautiful encapsulation of the film. It's nothing like anybody's seen before.
It draws you in, and thank God for HDR, because Bob absolutely was always insistent, use every tool available that's around to tell the film. And especially, this isn't a period piece, it's about the future. It should look fantastic and beautiful. And he was always encouraging every tool that's out there, use it to its greatest ability, specifically Dolby Atmos, just how powerful and encompassing and it just carries you into the film and helps with those highs and lows, that helps balance the pacing of the film, which was always another problem as well.
Right. So what needed to happen behind the scenes for this 4K realization to happen? I mean, this must have been in the throes for years, right?
What was the first part of the question?
What needed to happen behind the scenes? Who reached out? How did you put this whole plan together? And how did the eventual mastering of these cut scenes get put back into the film?
I'll tell you, first it was 20 years ago, after finally getting Bob to talk on Star Trek. It was always a sore point for him, because it was the one that got away in his career. But Spielberg had done the Close Encounters of the Third Kind special edition. Lucas did Star Wars, and the idea here was, maybe we can go back to the studio and ask them, can we reopen post-production and finish the film? So the idea was to do it on film, just actually make a finished film. But that's not what was happening at that time in studios. They were making their money with DVD, which was very successful, and fans were used to that. So we're given the opportunity to go back and complete the film, but in standard definition. And doing the film in 4K allowed us to go back to the original camera negative and do things like proper color grading with the full range that's within a film's camera negative, and all of the elements we were able to recombine. Now, so we did go to the studio, we got the green light, we did the DVD, we went back to the studio and said, here's your finished product, and this is what it looks like, let's do film. And there wasn't really a need for it. The studio didn't do revivals on film. And it took until Evolutionary, we reached the point of 4K, to be able to finally go back and say, hey, we need to go back and do this, because I wasn't willing to just do it for high def. If we were going to come back, this film needed to be the equivalent master that any other film had in the studio. It needed to not just have its life in standard definition like we had the previous one. It had to be able to go theatrical. It had to be, in the future, what any other film has, this needed its same chance. So now that we were doing 4K, I went back to the studio and said, hey, let's start talking again. And we did. And it honestly took about 3 years for us to just work out all the details. And in that time, the Paramount Archives went wild and searched everywhere and found so many fantastic elements that we needed, especially the godsend, which was the original ADR tapes of Bob directing the actors on the right presentation for their ADR, because many of the scenes had projectors in the background that were running. Some of that audio in the rush ended up in the film not the way Bob originally wanted even the vocal presentation or the meaning of their voices to be presented. So it was a blessing, and the timing is just what was right. And lastly on that is that, and I think the well, this is just wonderful. The point of the film, which is how technology is cold without humanity, at the time the film came out, the greatest technology we had was touch-tone phones. You know,
Yeah.
now we have cell phones. It's part of our life. I think it's more relevant today than ever before.
Right
Did
on.
that answer the question?
It totally did. And I'm glad the film came out. I'm going to wrap up. You're on to your next interview. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Cheers.